if I told you that the capacity for profound evil lives within every human being? Not metaphorically, not as religious allegory, but as demonstrable psychological and biological reality. Close your eyes for a moment and consider the most heinous acts in human history. The systematic torture, the calculated genocide, the casual cruelty inflicted by ordinary people on their neighbors. Now consider this uncomfortable truth. Under the right circumstances, with the right pressures and conditions, almost anyone might commit such acts. This isn't pessimism. This is what decades of psychological research, historical analysis, and neurological study have revealed about human nature. Welcome to an exploration of human evil, perhaps the most disturbing and necessary journey we can undertake. Over the next hours, as you drift towards sleep or simply listen and contemplate, we'll examine what makes humans capable of extraordinary cruelty. We'll travel through philosophy and religion, psychology and neuroscience, history and sociology. We'll confront uncomfortable truths about our species and ourselves. But we'll also discover that understanding evil is the first step toward preventing it. That acknowledging darkness is necessary for cultivating light, and that the same consciousness capable of recognizing evil is capable of transcending it. This isn't a condemnation of humanity. Rather, it's an honest reckoning with the fullness of human nature, both our capacity for tremendous good and our potential for terrible harm. Whether you're here to learn, to process difficult questions, or simply to fall asleep to a calm voice exploring profound topics, you're welcome. Let's begin this journey into the heart of darkness, not to despair, but to understand. The question of human evil has haunted philosophy, religion, and human consciousness since we first developed the capacity for moral reasoning. What makes an act evil rather than merely harmful? What distinguishes malicious cruelty from unfortunate accident or even necessary violence? Cultures across history and geography have grappled with these questions, and while specific answers vary, certain patterns emerge consistently. Evil involves intentionality, the deliberate choice to cause suffering or harm. It involves awareness, knowledge that one's actions will hurt others, and it often involves what philosophers call moral inversion, taking pleasure in causing pain, or at minimum, feeling no empathy for victims. The ancient Greeks were among the first to systematically philosophize about evil. Socrates famously argued that no one does evil willingly, that all wrongdoing stems from ignorance. If people truly understood what was good, he believed, they would naturally choose it. Evil actions resulted from failed reasoning, from mistaken beliefs about what would bring happiness or fulfillment. This intellectualist view of evil has profound implications. It suggests evil can be addressed through education, through helping people understand truth and goodness more clearly. Yet it struggles to explain acts of malice, of knowing cruelty where perpetrators seem fully aware their actions are wrong and choose them anyway. Plato developed Socrates' ideas further, proposing that the soul contained multiple parts that could come into conflict. The rational part understood good and pursued it, but appetitive and spirited parts could overpower reason, leading to evil actions. In Plato's vision, evil resulted from internal disorder, from allowing base desires to dominate higher faculties. The tyrant, in Plato's analysis, was the most wretched of humans precisely because his soul was enslaved to its worst elements. This psychological model of evil as internal disharmony influenced Western thought profoundly, appearing in modified forms throughout Christian theology and modern psychology. Aristotle took a different approach. viewing evil through his framework of virtue ethics. For Aristotle, evil consisted in vice, in character traits and habits that led reliably to harmful actions. Cruelty, cowardice, greed, and dishonesty represented stable character flaws that disposed people toward wrongdoing. Unlike Socrates' view that evil came from ignorance, Aristotle recognized that people could know the right thing to do yet fail to do it through weakness of will or corruption of character. His solution involved cultivating virtue through practice and habit, essentially training oneself to feel and act rightly until it became second nature. Moving eastward, Buddhist philosophy approached evil through the concept of ignorance, but with nuances distinct from Greek thought. In Buddhism, the fundamental ignorance involves misunderstanding the nature of reality, particularly the illusion of permanent, separate self. This fundamental confusion leads to attachment, aversion, and the actions that cause suffering. Evil acts stem from the three poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. Importantly, Buddhism emphasizes that these afflictions affect all beings, not some special category of evil people. Everyone possesses the seeds of harmful action, and everyone possesses the potential for enlightenment. The path to reducing evil involves meditation, ethical discipline, and cultivating wisdom that sees through the illusions generating harmful impulses. Confucian thought emphasized evil as departure from proper relationships and social harmony. Humans are born with potential for goodness, Confucius taught, but this potential requires cultivation through education, ritual, and social practices. Evil represents failure to fulfill one's role in the network of relationships that constitute society, failing as child, parent, citizen, or friend. The Confucian response to evil emphasized education in virtue, proper models to emulate, and creating social structures that encouraged ethical behavior. Where Western philosophy often focused on individual moral psychology, Confucian thought recognized that morality was fundamentally social, emerging from and returning to the web of human relationships. Hindu philosophy, in its diverse schools, offered multiple perspectives on evil. Advaita Vedanta, a non-dualistic school, taught that apparent evil ultimately reflects ignorance of reality's true nature, the fundamental unity of all existence. From the highest perspective, evil is illusion, though it must be taken seriously on the conventional level where suffering occurs. Other Hindu schools emphasized karma, the law of moral causation, where actions generate consequences across lifetimes. Evil actions resulted from accumulated negative karma, from attachment to illusion, from allowing base impulses to dominate higher consciousness. The solution involved spiritual practices that gradually purified consciousness and generated positive karma. These ancient philosophical traditions established frameworks for understanding evil that continue influencing thought today. They raised questions that remain live. Is evil primarily ignorance or willful choice? Is it individual or social? Is it part of human nature or a deviation from it? Can it be eliminated through education and spiritual practice? Or is it a permanent feature of existence? Different traditions answered differently, yet all recognized evil as a serious problem requiring sustained attention and offered methods for reducing it. The problem of evil took on new dimensions with the rise of monotheistic religions that posited an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfectly good God. If such a God exists, Why does evil exist? This theological problem, called theodicy, generated centuries of philosophical and religious discourse. The answers offered reveal much about how different traditions understood human malevolence and suffering. In Jewish thought, the Hebrew Bible presents evil as mysterious, sometimes attributed to God's inscrutable purposes, sometimes to human choice, sometimes to spiritual adversaries like the Satan figure who tested humans. The Book of Job particularly grapples with why terrible suffering afflicts the innocent, ultimately suggesting that divine purposes transcend human understanding. Christian theology developed the concept of original sin to explain human evil. According to traditional Christian doctrine, the first humans, Adam and Eve, possessed free will and the capacity for moral choice. They chose to disobey God, and this original sin corrupted human nature, introducing evil, suffering, and death into creation. All humans inherit this fallen nature, predisposing them towards sin and evil. This doctrine explained why even good people commit wrongdoing. Human nature itself was damaged. It also emphasized the seriousness of evil, making redemption require divine intervention through Christ's sacrifice. Critics note that original sin can seem unjust, punishing all humanity for one couple's choice, but defenders argue it captures important truths about how evil perpetuates across generations and how individual and collective sin intertwine. Christian theology also developed sophisticated angelology and demonology, attributing some evil to Satan and demons, fallen angels who rebelled against God and now tempt humans toward sin. This provided an external explanation for evil impulses, suggesting that humans face spiritual warfare against forces actively promoting wickedness. While this could excuse human responsibility, the devil made me do it. Mainstream theology insisted that humans retain free will and moral accountability, even when facing temptation. Satan might suggest evil, but humans choose whether to act. This framework understood evil as involving both internal human tendencies and external spiritual influences, requiring vigilance against both. Islamic theology similarly emphasized human free will and accountability. Humans are born with fitra, natural disposition toward goodness and recognition of God, but also possess nafs, the ego self that inclines toward wrong when not disciplined. The Quran describes human beings as ashrafu al-makhlukat, the best of creation, yet also notes humanity's capacity for profound ingratitude and wrongdoing. Iblis, the devil, leads humans astray through whispers and temptations, but cannot compel sin. Each person chooses whether to follow divine guidance or succumb to base impulses. Islamic ethics emphasized developing taqwa, consciousness of God, and ethical awareness as protection against evil inclinations. Eastern religious traditions approached evil differently, generally without the theodicy problem, since they didn't posit a single all-powerful creator. Buddhism explained suffering and evil through the law of karma and the cycle of rebirth. Actions motivated by greed, hatred, and delusion generate suffering both for perpetrator and victim, leading to negative karmic consequences that affect future lives. This system is impersonal, not punishment from deity, but natural moral causation. The path to ending evil involves understanding karma's operation and choosing actions motivated by wisdom, compassion, and non-attachment. Hinduism's diverse traditions offered multiple explanations, Some schools emphasized Maya, the cosmic illusion that obscures reality's true nature and leads to suffering when people act from ignorance. Others stressed the importance of Dharma, cosmic and social order that must be upheld. Evil resulted from adharma, violation of proper order, failure to fulfill one's role in the cosmic and social harmony. The Bhagavad Gita particularly wrestles with questions of righteous violence and when killing might be necessary duty rather than evil, exploring the complex relationship between action, intention, and cosmic order. Indigenous spiritual traditions worldwide generally understood wrongdoing as disrupting harmony with community, with land, with spirit world. Evil wasn't primarily an individual failing, but a violation of relationships requiring restoration through ritual, restitution, and community healing. Many indigenous traditions lacked concepts of absolute evil, instead recognizing that people made mistakes, caused harm, or lost balance with proper ways. The response involved bringing individuals and communities back into harmony rather than punishment or condemnation. Some traditions recognized malevolent spirits or sorcery as causes of harm, requiring specialized spiritual practitioners to address. Religious understandings of evil shaped how cultures approached wrongdoing, designed moral education, and responded to perpetrators. They provided frameworks for understanding why humans commit cruel acts, offered practices for resisting evil impulses, and held out hope for redemption or transformation. While specific doctrines varied enormously, religions agreed that evil was real, serious, and something humans must actively combat through spiritual practice, ethical discipline, and community support. As philosophy and religion contemplated evil theoretically, history provided brutal demonstrations of human capacity for cruelty on vast scales. Ancient civilizations practiced forms of violence and oppression that modern sensibilities find shocking. Yet these were often normalized within their contexts. The Assyrian Empire carved reliefs celebrating torture and destruction of enemies. Roman crowds gathered to watch gladiatorial combat and public executions as entertainment. Aztec religious practices involved large-scale human sacrifice. These weren't seen as evil by perpetrators, but as natural, necessary, or even sacred. This historical reality raises disturbing questions about moral relativism and whether evil is culturally constructed or has some objective reality. The ancient world witnessed countless atrocities, conquered cities put to the sword, populations enslaved, enemies crucified as warnings. Violence and cruelty were tools of statecraft, means of instilling terror and establishing dominance. What's striking isn't just that such acts occurred. Violence has always been part of human behavior, but the scale, organization, and lack of moral concern they often displayed. Alexander the Great destroyed Thebes, selling survivors into slavery as punishment for rebellion. The Romans destroyed Carthage so thoroughly they allegedly salted the earth. These acts of calculated, systematic destruction required massive coordination and the participation of thousands of ordinary soldiers and officials. Medieval Europe witnessed its own horrors. The Crusades combined religious fervor with geopolitical ambition, resulting in massacres of Muslims, Jews, and even fellow Christians. The Mongol conquests killed millions, with cities that resisted facing complete annihilation. The Inquisition tortured and executed heretics, operating with ecclesiastical blessing. Witch trials led to thousands of executions based on impossible charges and confessions extracted through torture. What's significant isn't that pre-modern people were uniquely evil, they weren't, but that social, religious, and political structures enabled and even encouraged systematic cruelty that claimed to serve higher purposes. The European colonization of the Americas, Africa, Asia, and Oceania produced evil on unprecedented scale. Indigenous populations faced conquest, enslavement, cultural destruction, and genocide. The Atlantic slave trade transported millions of Africans in horrific conditions, creating slavery systems of industrial scale and cruelty. The Congo Free State under King Leopold II of Belgium resulted in deaths estimated between 1 and 15 million through forced labor, murder, and mutilation. Colonial powers justified these atrocities through ideologies of racial superiority and civilizing missions, demonstrating how intellectual and moral frameworks can rationalize immense harm. The 20th century brought evil to industrial scale. The Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, Stalin's purges and forced famines, Mao's Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution, the Cambodian genocide, the Rwandan genocide, ethnic cleansing in the Balkans. The list is horrifyingly long. The Holocaust particularly stands as symbol of systematized, bureaucratized, technologically enabled mass murder. The Nazi regime murdered 6 million Jews along with Roma, disabled people, political opponents, and others in a machinery of death involving thousands of perpetrators, from leaders to guards to clerks processing paperwork. The banality and efficiency of industrial genocide represented something qualitatively new, evil implemented through modern organizational and technological systems. What patterns emerge from this historical litany of horrors? First, the capacity for cruelty appears universal across cultures and eras. No civilization has clean hands. Second, ideologies and belief systems consistently justify atrocities. Religious, political, racial, or nationalist frameworks that dehumanize victims and sacralize violence. Third, most perpetrators are ordinary people, not uniquely evil individuals. Genocide and systematic cruelty require mass participation, revealing that under certain conditions, normal humans commit terrible acts. Fourth, technology and organization allow evil to scale in ways impossible in simpler societies. Fifth, evil often claims righteousness. Crusaders, colonizers, and genocidaires typically believe they serve good causes. The 20th century's horrors prompted new urgency in understanding human evil psychologically. What makes ordinary people commit atrocities? Are perpetrators of great evil fundamentally different from others? Or could anyone become a killer under the right conditions? Social psychologists conducted experiments that provided disturbing answers to these questions. Experiments now considered landmarks in understanding human malevolence. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments in the 1,960 seconds revealed how readily people inflict harm when ordered by authorities. Participants believed they were administering increasingly painful electric shocks to learners who made mistakes, though no actual shocks were delivered, despite hearing apparent screams and pleas. About 65% of participants continued to maximum voltage when the experimenter insisted. These were ordinary Americans, not selected for cruelty or authoritarianism, yet most obeyed instructions to harm strangers despite obvious distress. Milgram's experiments suggested that situational pressures and authority figures could override moral qualms, helping explain how ordinary Germans participated in the Holocaust, or how soldiers commit atrocities when ordered. Philip Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiment in 1971 explored how roles and situations shape behavior. College students were randomly assigned to play guards or prisoners in a mock prison. The experiment, planned for 2 weeks, was terminated after 6 days because guards became increasingly abusive and prisoners showed signs of extreme stress. Zimbardo argued that the prison situation itself generated cruel behavior from people who were normal before the experiment. The situational forces, uniforms, authority, de-individuation, lack of oversight, transformed participants into abusers or victims. Critics have questioned the experiment's methodology and Zimbardo's interpretations, noting he actively encouraged guard brutality. But the basic finding that situations powerfully influence behavior toward cruelty remains significant. These experiments and others demonstrated key psychological mechanisms enabling evil. Obedience to authority causes people to relinquish moral judgment to superiors. De-individuation, where people lose sense of individual identity in groups or through uniforms and anonymity, reduces personal responsibility and ethical restraint. Diffusion of responsibility occurs when many people participate in harm. Each can tell themselves they're just following orders or doing a small part, not truly responsible. Dehumanization involves seeing victims as less than human, as vermin or objects rather than people, making violence psychologically easier. Moral disengagement includes multiple cognitive mechanisms like euphemistic labeling, advantageous comparison, and blaming victims that allow people to harm others without experiencing guilt or moral distress. Hannah Arendt, covering the Adolf Eichmann trial, coined the phrase, "the banality of evil," to describe how ordinary, unremarkable people commit great atrocities through thoughtlessness, careerism, and bureaucratic compliance, rather than ideological fanaticism. Eichmann wasn't a monster in his personal life. He was a mediocre bureaucrat focused on career advancement and following orders efficiently. This banality proved more disturbing than demonic evil because it suggested that systematic cruelty doesn't require exceptional wickedness, just ordinary people doing jobs within evil systems. The implications are profound. Any of us might participate in atrocity, given the right circumstances, unless we actively resist situational pressures and organizational momentum toward evil. While situational factors explain much evil, individual differences matter too. Psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder represent clinical conditions characterized by lack of empathy, manipulativeness, and willingness to harm others for personal gain. Psychopaths feel no genuine remorse, viewing others instrumentally as objects to exploit. Estimates suggest 1 to 2% of general population has psychopathic traits, higher in prison populations and certain professions. However, most evil doesn't result from psychopathy. Most perpetrators of genocide, torture, and cruelty are not clinical psychopaths, but ordinary people in extraordinary situations or responding to cultural and ideological pressures. Research on moral development reveals that people vary in their capacity for moral reasoning and empathy. Some never develop beyond self-interested moral thinking, while others achieve principled moral reasoning based on universal ethical principles. Childhood experiences, particularly abuse, neglect, or exposure to violence, predict later aggression and reduced empathy. Yet prediction isn't determination. Many people with terrible childhoods don't become cruel. While some perpetrators came from seemingly normal backgrounds, the interaction of biology, psychology, and situation produces the capacity and willingness to commit evil acts, with no single factor sufficient to explain malevolence. Neuroscience has identified brain structures and processes involved in aggression and empathy. The prefrontal cortex regulates impulses and enables moral reasoning. The amygdala processes threats and generates fear and aggression. The anterior cingulate cortex and insula are involved in empathy and emotional awareness. Damage to or dysfunction in these areas can increase violent behavior or reduce capacity for moral judgment and empathy. Studies of violent criminals and psychopaths show reduced activity in prefrontal regions and altered connectivity between areas involved in emotion and cognition. However, brain differences alone don't determine behavior. People with similar neurological profiles can choose very different paths. Social and cultural factors profoundly shape how evil manifests and spreads. Societies normalize certain forms of violence while condemning others, creating moral frameworks that enable some atrocities while preventing others. Pre-modern societies accepted slavery. Modern societies condemn it not, because humans became less capable of cruelty, but because moral norms shifted. How does society shift from condemning to accepting systematic violence? The process involves propaganda, ideological indoctrination, gradualism, and what psychologists call moral disengagement, cognitive processes that allow people to harm others without experiencing moral distress. Genocide and mass atrocity always involve propaganda campaigns that dehumanize victim groups, portraying them as threats, parasites, or subhuman. Nazi propaganda depicted Jews as racial enemies threatening German survival. Rwandan genocide involved months of radio broadcasts calling Tutsis cockroaches, requiring extermination. These campaigns work by activating in-group, out-group psychology, the human tendency to favor one's own group, and dehumanize outsiders. Once people accept that certain humans aren't really human or that they represent existential threats, violence against them becomes psychologically permissible or even necessary. This mechanism appears throughout history, from ancient warfare to modern terrorism, demonstrating that dehumanization is powerful enabler of cruelty. Economic systems and social structures can constitute forms of structural evil, systematic harm built into social organization rather than resulting from individual malice. Slavery represented structural evil, an economic system where some humans owned others, requiring massive infrastructure of violence, surveillance, and propaganda to maintain. Even many slave owners who weren't particularly cruel individually participated in and benefited from profoundly evil system. Similarly, extreme poverty, amid abundance, preventable deaths from lack of health care or nutrition, and environmental destruction causing future suffering, represent forms of structural violence that may not result from individual malicious intent, yet cause massive harm. Technology has dramatically increased the scale and efficiency of evil. Ancient warriors could kill dozens. Modern weapons kill millions. Ancient propaganda reached thousands. Modern media reaches billions. The Holocaust required railroads to transport victims, industrial chemistry to produce poison gas, bureaucracy to coordinate logistics. Modern surveillance technology enables unprecedented social control. Artificial intelligence might soon enable automated warfare or surveillance at scales previously impossible. Technology is morally neutral, a tool that amplifies both good and evil human intentions, but it undeniably makes evil more scalable and efficient when humans choose to employ it toward cruel ends. The internet and social media demonstrate technology's double-edged nature regarding evil. They enable unprecedented connection, information sharing, and coordination for good causes. They also enable cyberbullying, harassment campaigns, radicalization, and coordination among hate groups. Algorithms optimize for engagement, often amplifying outrage and extremism. Anonymity and distance reduce normal social constraints on cruelty. A person might never physically assault someone but will gleefully participate in online harassment mobs. The technology isn't evil, but it creates affordances that humans' worst impulses can exploit. Understanding biological and evolutionary roots of aggression helps contextualize human capacity for violence without excusing it. Humans evolved as social primates with capacities for both cooperation and competition, altruism and aggression. Violence served adaptive functions in ancestral environments, defending against threats, competing for resources and mates, establishing dominance hierarchies. Natural selection shaped psychological mechanisms supporting aggression under certain circumstances. Male violence particularly shows marks of evolutionary adaptation, with higher rates across all societies reflecting sexual selection pressures. However, humans also evolved remarkable capacities for cooperation, empathy, and moral reasoning that constrain violence. The evolutionary perspective reveals that humans have competing tendencies, neither inherently good nor evil, but capable of both depending on circumstances and choices. Genetic factors influence aggression and antisocial behavior, though effects are small and heavily moderated by environment. Twin and adoption studies show that some of the variance in violent behavior is heritable. Genes affecting neurotransmitter systems like serotonin and dopamine influence impulse control and aggression. The MAOA gene, sometimes called warrior gene, has been associated with increased aggression, particularly when combined with childhood maltreatment. However, genetic influence is probabilistic, not deterministic. Most people with high-risk genes don't become violent. Genes create tendencies that environment can amplify or suppress. The nature versus nurture debate is outdated. Both matter, interacting in complex ways. Testosterone has complex relationship with aggression. It does increase competitive and dominance-seeking behavior, but effects depend heavily on social context. Testosterone doesn't directly cause violence, but influences status-seeking, which manifests differently depending on cultural norms. In violent cultures, high testosterone individuals might be more aggressive. In pro-social cultures, they might be more generous and achievement-oriented. This illustrates broader principle. Biological factors influence behavior, but culture and choice determine how those influences express themselves. It's crucial to distinguish aggression from evil. Aggression is behavioral tendency toward harm that humans share with countless species. Evil involves moral dimension, intentional harm, cruelty for its own sake, callous disregard for suffering. Animals can be aggressive but aren't evil. They lack the moral awareness that makes acts truly malevolent. Humans uniquely combine biological aggression with consciousness, moral reasoning, and capacity for deliberate cruelty. This combination makes us capable of both transcendent goodness and unprecedented evil. As we've journeyed through philosophy and religion, history and psychology, neuroscience and anthropology, patterns in human evil become clear. Evil isn't external force invading otherwise pure humans, nor is it fundamental essence of human nature. Rather, it emerges from interaction of multiple factors: biological capacities for aggression, psychological mechanisms like obedience and dehumanization, social structures and ideologies, situational pressures, and individual choices. Understanding this complexity is essential for addressing evil effectively. Most comforting myths about evil are false. Evil isn't limited to monsters fundamentally different from us. Ordinary people commit terrible acts under the right conditions. Evil isn't always recognized as such by perpetrators. Ideology, authority, and psychological mechanisms allow people to harm others while believing they do good. Evil isn't an inevitable product of human nature. Our species is capable of tremendous cruelty, but also remarkable compassion, and which dominates depends partly on social conditions and personal choices. Evil isn't mysterious metaphysical force. It has identifiable causes and mechanisms we can study and potentially address. The psychological research on obedience, conformity, and situational influences reveals both disturbing truths and hopeful implications. Yes, ordinary people can be pressured into evil acts, but the same research shows that small acts of resistance make tremendous difference. In Milgram's experiments, when participants saw another person refuse to continue, their own obedience dropped dramatically. Dissenters break the spell of authority and groupthink. This means individuals can reduce evil through personal courage, refusing participation, speaking up, offering alternative narratives that counter dehumanization. Heroes in genocides often weren't extraordinary people, but ordinary individuals who said no when others complied. Can evil be prevented or reduced? History provides both pessimistic and optimistic evidence. Human cruelty has persisted across all recorded history, suggesting deep roots resistant to elimination. Yet moral progress has occurred, slavery abolished, human rights recognized, gratuitous cruelty increasingly condemned. Societies can be more or less violent, more or less just. Sweden today has dramatically lower violence than medieval Europe or contemporary Venezuela. This demonstrates that while evil capacity remains constant, its expression varies based on social conditions, institutions, and norms that can be deliberately shaped. Several factors reduce evil's prevalence. Education that develops empathy and moral reasoning helps people resist pressures toward cruelty. Democratic institutions with checks on power prevent worst excesses of authoritarianism. Economic security reduces competition-driven violence. Diverse contact between groups undermines dehumanization. Strong norms against violence backed by reliable justice systems deter aggression. Mental health care and early intervention for children showing antisocial behavior can prevent trajectories towards severe criminality. None of these eliminates evil, but together they reduce its frequency and severity. Confronting evil also requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Each of us contains capacity for cruelty, selfishness, and moral failure. Understanding situational influences on evil isn't excuse-making, but recognizing that it couldn't happen here, or I would never do that, represents dangerous complacency. The guards at concentration camps, the participants in lynch mobs, the torturers for military dictatorships, they were humans like us. Different circumstances, different choices, but not different species. This recognition should generate not despair, but humility and vigilance. Vigilance requires resisting pressure toward obedience when authorities demand immoral acts. It requires questioning ideologies that dehumanize groups or justify violence against them. It requires maintaining empathy even for those designated as enemies or others. It requires speaking up when witnessing cruelty, even when costly. It requires examining our own potential for cruelty and consciously choosing better. These aren't guarantees against evil. Courage can be punished. Resistance can fail. Personal goodness can't prevent all structural evil. But they're our best protection against evil's worst manifestations. Perhaps most importantly, confronting evil requires balancing awareness of darkness with recognition of light. Yes, humans are capable of terrible cruelty, but we're also capable of profound compassion, heroic self-sacrifice, and moral beauty. The same species that created Auschwitz also created art, science, philosophy, and love. People who risked their lives to save strangers during genocides. Activists who fought for justice despite personal cost. Ordinary individuals who show daily kindness. These represent human potential too. Evil is real, but it's not the whole story. The question isn't whether humans are fundamentally good or evil. We're neither, and both. Capable of tremendous range depending on circumstances and choices. The relevant question is what we'll do with this knowledge. Will we create conditions that bring out our better nature or our worse? Will we resist evil when we encounter it, or rationalize and enable it? Will we honestly acknowledge our capacity for wrongdoing, or maintain comfortable delusions about our inherent goodness? These choices, made individually and collectively, shape how much evil manifests in the world. As you drift towards sleep, contemplating these heavy questions, remember that understanding evil isn't cause for despair, but for clear-eyed action. Every act of kindness pushes back against cruelty. Every moment of empathy resists dehumanization. Every choice to speak truth counters propaganda and manipulation. Every effort to create just institutions reduces structural evil. You possess moral agency. The circumstances and social forces we've discussed constrain and influence, but don't determine your choices. Evil is possible for you, as it is for all humans. So is goodness. The history we explored shows both potentials manifesting at every scale. Which you actualize matters. Thank you for undertaking this difficult exploration. Understanding human evil isn't pleasant, but it's necessary, both intellectually and morally. If this journey has left you with questions or troubling thoughts, that's appropriate. Evil should trouble us, but alongside the darkness we've explored, hold awareness of human capacity for good. Tomorrow, you'll wake to a world where both evil and goodness exist, where humans harm and help each other, where choice and circumstance intertwine. You now understand more about the forces generating cruelty and the factors preventing it. Use that understanding wisely. If you found value in this exploration, consider subscribing to continue these journeys into profound questions about human nature, history, and existence. There's always more to explore, more to understand, more wisdom from thousands of years of human reflection on our condition. But for now, rest. Let these heavy truths settle. Sleep, knowing that acknowledging darkness is the first step toward light, that understanding evil is necessary for cultivating good, and that you possess both the capacity to recognize what's right and the agency to pursue it. Sweet dreams, fellow traveler, and may your waking hours be marked by wisdom, compassion, and courage to resist evil wherever you encounter it.